Have you ever wondered who the funniest prophet in the Bible is? Well, today we're diving into one of the most hilarious moments in biblical history, the time Elijah completely roasted the prophets of Baal. But before we get into that, make sure to subscribe to join our spiritually minded community. Now let's talk about Elijah and why this moment is pure comedic gold. Who was Elijah? Elijah was a mighty prophet of God from Tishbe in Gilead. He lived during the reign of King Ahab, and let's just say, Ahab and his wife Jezebel were not fans of Elijah. Why? Because Elijah was out here exposing the truth, and Jezebel was pushing Baal worship like it was the latest trend, which it was at the time. But Elijah, he wasn't having it. The state of Israel at the time, Israel was going through a spiritual crisis. The people had turned away from God, following Ahab and Jezebel's lead in worshipping Baal, a false god who, as we'll soon see, wasn't very responsive. Jezebel, being the charming, Afrocentric queen she was, had prophets of God executed and wanted Elijah gone too. But Elijah was on a mission. Who were Ahab and Jezebel? King Ahab was the seventh king of Israel and is often remembered as one of the most wicked rulers in Israel's history. His reign was marked by political alliances, military strength, and, most infamously, spiritual corruption. While Ahab had some leadership skills, his downfall was his marriage to Jezebel, a Phoenician princess who introduced Baal worship on a national scale. She wasn't just a worshipper of Baal, she was its most zealous promoter, funding hundreds of false prophets and silencing anyone who opposed her. Under their rule, the worship of Yahweh was nearly erased from Israel. Jezebel didn't just tolerate Baal worship, she enforced it. She ordered the execution of God's prophets, established Baal temples, and actively worked to make Israel forget their covenant with God. Ahab, though king, was largely influenced by her, making him a weak and spiritually compromised ruler. This was the environment Elijah stepped into, a nation led by a cowardly king and a ruthless queen who sought to wipe out the worship of the true God. What was Baal worship? Baal was considered the god of fertility, storms, and rain. The Canaanites and surrounding nations believed he controlled the weather and agriculture, which made him a big deal in an agrarian society. People built altars, performed sacrifices, sometimes even human ones, and engaged in wild rituals to appease him. Jezebel, a devoted Baal worshipper, aggressively promoted this religion, bringing in hundreds of prophets and persecuting anyone who worshipped the God of Israel. The people, caught between political pressure and spiritual confusion, followed along, believing Baal held the power of life and prosperity. But as we're about to see, Baal was all hype and no action. The ultimate God challenge. Elijah decided it was time to settle this once and for all. He challenged the prophets of Baal to a showdown on Mount Carmel. The challenge: each side would prepare a sacrifice, but instead of lighting it themselves, they had to call on their God to send fire from the sky. Simple, right? Now imagine the scene. The entire nation of Israel gathered around, watching this epic contest unfold. Some were skeptical, others excited, and a few probably had their bets placed. This wasn't just a religious dispute, it was prime entertainment. Could Baal really back up all the praise his followers gave him? Or was Elijah about to expose him as a fraud? The tension was high, and everyone was eager to see what would happen. The prophets of Baal went first. They prayed, they shouted, they danced, they even cut themselves to get Baal's attention. And what happened? Crickets. Nothing. Silence. It was like waiting for a text back that never comes. Now here's where Elijah proved he had jokes. Watching the prophets struggle, he started flaming them. Maybe Baal is daydreaming. Maybe he's using the bathroom. Maybe he's on vacation. Maybe he's sleeping, and you need to wake him up. Yes, this is all in the Bible. Elijah was straight up clowning these guys. But after hours of their failed attempts, it was his turn. He drenched his altar in water, not once, but 3 times, just to make sure no one thought this was a trick. Then he prayed to God, and boom! Fire from heaven consumed everything. The sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and even the water. Talk about dramatic effects. The crowd's reaction. Can you imagine being there? The crowd that had been watching in suspense probably went wild. First, they had been waiting all day for Baal to do something, anything. Then, in an instant, Elijah's God came through in the most spectacular way possible. People were probably screaming, falling over, pointing, and gasping in shock. Some were likely repenting on the spot, realizing they had been following the wrong God. The prophets of Baal, on the other hand, were sweating bullets. They had just been humiliated in front of the whole nation, and they knew Elijah wasn't going to let them just walk away after this. What happened next? After this divine display, the people of Israel fell to their knees, realizing who the real God was. The prophets of Baal. Well, let's just say they didn't get a second chance. And Jezebel, she was furious and tried to have Elijah killed, but her own end was just as dramatic. She was thrown out of a window, and the local dogs had an unexpected meal that day. 2 Kings chapter 9 verse 35 tells us that they only found her skull, hands and feet. So it's safe to say that the dogs thought the meal was bussin'. So, what can we learn from this story today? First, the truth will always prevail. It doesn't matter how many people believe a lie. When God shows up, falsehoods get exposed. Second, don't be afraid to stand alone for what's right. Elijah was one man against hundreds of false prophets, but he knew God was with him. Lastly, God doesn't just hear our prayers, he answers in powerful ways. It might not always be as dramatic as fire from heaven, but when we trust him, he makes his presence known. Elijah was not just a powerful prophet, he was bold, fearless, and knew how to deliver the perfect comeback. This story shows us that God always proves himself, no matter how many false voices are out there. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay connected with our spiritually minded community. Until next time, stay blessed and keep the faith.